looks really intimidating. It's a whole bunch of boxes on here, but it's really easy because you're just essentially, for 90% of this, just moving money around to boxes. So on your Chapter 8 test, the first page of your test will look like this, exactly. Different numbers, but it will look exactly like this. So what this is called a worksheet, and this is a tool that helps you prepare your year-end financial statements. So what you start with is just a trial balance. So you've got all your accounts listed off here: assets, liabilities, capital drawings, revenue, expenses, and then their balances, debit or credit, and then the totals. So you can see it says trial balance there, debit, credit, and the last line, there's one line above, two lines below, and they both balance. So this is just a trial balance, that's it. Nothing crazy, you guys have done it a number of times before, it's easy. These next two columns, you can see, are called adjustments. So those 4 adjustments we just learned in 8.1, you're gonna put those in these 2 columns. Okay, that's it. There's a column for debits, column for credits. So you're gonna make sure you make 4 balanced journal entries. And again, debits should match credits on the bottom of this. So I'll just flip through that to show you. So they just put in here, here's the first one where they do supplies. They just point out that if there's no expense account here for supplies, you write it on the next available line, just down below. So there is no expense account for supplies, they wrote it in themselves. It has a 1 beside it because it's entry number 1. Just like when you're doing T account entries, they put a 1 circle. Okay, this just shows they're doing insurance. Same thing. And then this picture shows the last 2. So number 3 is late arriving invoices, accounts payable, and there's 3 of them here, 3 expense accounts. Number 4 is unearned revenue. So they've got revenue, and then down below, unearned revenue. So this column here is just putting the stuff we just did in 8.1 down in this column. So nothing new at all. And the bottom, it should balance, because every journal entry should be equal debits and credits. So notice how the last 2 numbers are the same. Okay, so once this is done, the next step is you're gonna move the numbers to their appropriate financial statement. So you can see there's columns here for income statement and balance sheet. And the trick is, there's no account that goes on both. So if you're writing a number in both the income statement and the balance sheet, you made a mistake, because there's nothing goes on both. So you basically put all the revenue accounts and expense accounts on the income statement, that's it. Everything else goes in the balance sheet. So revenue, expenses, income statement, everything else, balance sheet. Pretty simple rule. So what happens is, and this just shows some of these things done in isolation, so you can get a look at it. Accounts that have no adjustment are easy. So for example, bank, because there's no math to do. So this was a debit here in the trial balance. That's an asset account. It's a debit on the balance sheet. So there's no math. Accounts that have adjustments require some math. So for example, supplies, that's a debit here on the trial balance. The adjustment to it was a credit, so debit minus the credit goes as the final balance on the balance sheet. Okay, so the trial balance number, the adjustment are opposite, debit credit wise, subtract. Down here, this shows accounts payable was a credit in the trial balance. The adjustment, also a credit. So a credit and a credit, you would add them and then put the balance over there. So make sure if there's an adjustment, do the math. The adjustment's the opposite, debit credit wise, you subtract. If it's the same, you add. And that's what I was talking about there. Then when you're done, it will look like this. So a whole bunch of numbers, but it's not really difficult. You'll notice that the income statement column, all it has is revenue and expenses. That's it. And then the balance sheet over here has all of your assets, liabilities, capital, and drawings. The easiest mistake to make, if you look way down here in the bottom, during the adjustments, we had to add in unearned revenue, right? That is a liability account. So it's got to go way over here by itself because liabilities go on the balance sheet. So don't make that mistake. It's easy to either forget it or accidentally put it on the income statement. But unearned revenue is a liability, goes in the balance sheet. So it goes way over in the balance sheet column. Okay, last thing we'll go over is just how do you fill at the bottom. So I'll zoom in to this here. And just remember that these two columns here were the income statement, these two were the balance sheet. Okay, so income statement, balance sheet. If you look at the bottom, there's a line of 4 numbers, then 2, then 4 down there. And it's actually very simple once you practice it. Remember that before you moved everything, your debits and credits here and here balanced, right? They were the same. So when you moved part of the accounts to the income statement and the other part to the balance sheet, they're not going to balance anymore. But they're going to be off by exactly the opposite. Because if you were to combine them all again, they would balance. That's why these numbers here are the same. So the reason is. And these columns here, this first row, is just adding up the debit and credit columns. So this is the total debits on the income statement column. That's the total credits. Total debits, balance sheet, total credits. This number, 207, represents total revenue, because that's the revenue account balance up there. This number, 147, represents total expenses, because these are all your expense accounts. So the difference between these two numbers, revenue and expenses, is net income or net loss. And in this case, there was more revenue than there was expenses. So this number, the 60, represents your net income for the year. And over here, you do the same. So the difference between those two gets written below the smaller number. Because in the bottom, they're going to balance again. So if you add these two together, should equal that one. If you add these two, should equal that one. So when you have a net income, it's always going to look just like this. You're going to have a number on this side and this side. This will be blank. If it was net loss, it'd be the opposite. You'd number here and here, but that'd be blank. Because if it was net loss, your expenses would be higher than your revenue. So your balancing figure, this number, would go below the smaller one, which would be revenue. So there's only 2 possible scenarios: net income, which looks like this, or net loss, where these numbers get put in the inside there. And on this same line, if you look over there, it's going to say net income. So you can see it says net income there, because that number represents your net income for the year. So this is not difficult. You're just adding up the columns individually. They're not going to match. You make them match by putting the difference below the smaller number. And that difference is called the balancing figure, because it makes the columns balance. And it represents net income or net loss. This is net income. Net loss would be here and here, because revenue would be lower than expenses. So in your questions, there's only 2 exercises here in this section. You're going to fill out 2 worksheets. One of them is net income. One of them is net loss. So if you have both net income, both net loss, you did it wrong. Okay, so you're going to fill out 2 of these. And like I mentioned on your test, the very first page is going to be this. Then I'm going to ask you on the next page to journalize your adjusting journal entries, so write them down in a journal. Then you're going to make your year-end income statement and balance sheet using these numbers here. So it's like kind of one longer question. And if you can fill this out, the rest of it kind of falls in line. But if you struggle with this, then it's hard to make up the other parts. So I mean, you've got to know how to do this, or else it's going to be difficult for you to move on the next few pages. So make sure you practice. So you can see here, there's 1 example, and then 2 examples. That's it. And they give you below the adjusting journal entry information that you're going to put in the adjustment columns, and then carry everything forward. So you got today to work on it, and then tomorrow, and we'll go over all the answers on Thursday. Then we have just 1 section left. That's it, and we're done. So we're so close to the end. but make sure you practice, because this is something that can be really easy if you practice, or can be really hard if you don't. That's why I said in the last test, a lot of people, if they're gonna do poorly, like almost leave it blank, because they just haven't practiced, don't know what they're doing. So make sure you're not that person. You've actually practiced it, and you can easily just do the same thing on your test. Okay, that was it.